Ah, soft bread. On a boat, it's just asking to be squished. So how do you keep it whole and out of the way? Hi there. I'm Nika Waters, and on this episode of the Boat Galley podcast, I'm sharing Carolyn's method for keeping bread handy without other food items crushing it. Today, the Boat Galley podcast is thrilled to be partnered with the Salty Dog Sailing Association, an educational and charitable organization that helps sailors realize their long-distance cruising dreams. Salty Dogs volunteers are veteran sailors, guiding newbies to independent decision-making and offshore confidence. Join a rally, join a rendezvous, but whatever you do, join the Salty Dog Sailing Association today. Salty Dog Sailing Association, sailors helping sailors. Visit saltydogsailing.org to learn more. That's SALTYDAWG sailing.org. I'm sure that if you spent some time on the Salty Dog fleet, you'd have lots of people talking about bread. Bread that they bought, bread that they made, bread that they had on hand. People are sharing bread. There's bread on a boat is just brilliant and important. And how do you store it? Because that can be a challenge. This whole podcast and the article that it's really based on was inspired by a question from a reader named Dawn, who asked, how do you keep store-bought bread? I know there's a new lock and lock container, but what about when I have hamburger buns and bagels? And so Carolyn's take on this, and the article is linked in the show notes. If you have only a single loaf, a plastic bread protector, such as a lock and lock container, can work well and doesn't take up too much more space than the loaf. But if you have more loaves or buns or bagels or anything else, trying to keep each one in its own plastic container just takes up way too much space. Carolyn has developed a couple of other strategies to keep the bread from getting squished and also to keep it fresh. Note that we're talking about typical store-bought bread, not homemade bread. Homemade bread tends to have fewer preservatives in it, and so it's a little bit harder to keep it fresh. But hey, that just means you can make it more frequently, right? Carolyn usually keeps her bread in one of the gear hammocks in the salon. She hung 4 gear hammocks from the overhead handholds so they wouldn't crash into anything with the motion of the boat. She put a large plastic bin in one and just piled all the bread, buns, and tortillas in it, leaving them all in their plastic wrappers, and didn't really worry about putting a lid on top. And so since she wasn't using the lid, she bought a cheap plastic container instead of a good one. The bin was about 18 inches square, so 2 loaves of bread would fit in one layer side by side, and about 9 inches high. And at this point, you might be asking a couple of questions. Why in the world would you put a plastic bin in a gear hammock? Well, because otherwise the hammock itself would squish the bread. Didn't the bread spoil faster being near the ceiling where it was hot? Carolyn was writing this when they were cruising Mexico. And Mexico has a bread that I've even heard about, even though I've never been to Mexico, a bread called Bimbo. Bimbo is known to last forever without spoiling, which is great for cruisers, but it's a little frightening to think about what preservatives might be in it. If having a plastic bin in a gear hammock is not practical on your boat, you could get almost any type of plastic bin that's large enough to hold your whole bread supply and keep it in some out-of-the-way spot. Maybe moving it from the V-berth or the quarter berth to the galley. I wouldn't worry about getting a really good airtight container if you leave the bread in its wrapper and everyone aboard makes sure always to close loaves up tightly. But be sure to use the lid to that container if you put it somewhere that stuff could fall on it. It might not apply on your boat either, but a lot of cruisers do use an oven or a microwave as their bread storage and just take it out when using the oven or the microwave. Sometimes bread takes a little bit of ingenious thinking about how to store it. But if you want to have lots of good bread on board, sometimes figuring out how to keep it without having it get squished is definitely important. I can't wait to share an anchorage with you, and maybe we're sharing the bread that we have or the tips that we have for making boat life better. But in any case, we can toast to our good fortune to being able to share this incredible lifestyle. Thank you so much for listening to the Boat Galley podcast. We love hearing from our listeners. We love it when you share us with your friends. We love it when you don't forget to subscribe. And we love it when you don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. Have the most spectacular week.